Do you have all four microphones on? Yep. Okay. We can start off with a question from SMS. Do you believe that there is only one way of truth to God? Why do we not just ask God to guide us to the truth, since He is, quote unquote, God with infinite power? I am sure that God will guide me to the truth one day in my life, when I feel it with logic.
Say the last line again.
I am sure that God will guide me to the truth one day in my life when I feel it with logic.
Great question. Really good question. Truth, by definition, is exclusive. The moment you make an affirmation or an assertion about life's essence and meaning, you are implicitly saying that something that's contradictory to that is either false or your way is just one way of thinking and it is not the truth. When you go into a court of law, you are always asked questions with the attorney on the other side of the issue looking for two things: correspondence and coherence. Correspondence of truth applies to particular assertions and statements. Were you at that place on the day of the murder? No, I wasn't. They will make sure you are telling the truth. But that one answer doesn't mean you had nothing to do with the murder. It only says you were not there at the time of the murder. So the second thing the lawyer will try to do and test you is not just correspondence, but coherence. Are all of your answers fitting together in a coherent response? So truth generally in components looks for correspondence and coherence. What are you looking for? Number one, the truth. Number two, you test it with correspondence and coherence. How do you test correspondence and coherence in a worldview? That takes you to three: logical consistency, empirical adequacy, or experiential relevance. When I study Christianity or Hinduism or Islam or whatever, I'm looking for these three tests: logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance when you're studying any worldview. What are the questions you have to ask of that worldview? There are four. Questions on origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And you bring 5 disciplines to bear upon it. I won't go into all of those. One is truth, correspondence, coherence, logical consistency, empirical adequacy, experiential relevance, answers to origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Now here it is. You take the major worldviews, pantheism or the monotheistic faith, putting one against the other, you will find that they are not all saying the same thing. They are making assertions that mutually exclude what the other worldview claims. So the fact of the matter is, truth, by definition, is exclusive. And as you've raised the question, you have given part of the answer yourself, that you would look for it to be logically persuasive in what you believe. You don't want an illogical or an irrational faith to hold on to. And I say to you, when I put these tests to the Judeo-Christian faith in the person of Jesus Christ, I'll answer that tomorrow, why I am a Christian, Michael, and I will answer it. I find it is the only worldview that meets all of these tests. The fact of the matter is, logically, they can all be wrong, but logically, they cannot all be right, unless you're living in a madhouse. So here's what I would say to you, sir or ma'am, who wrote this question. Open the Bible, take the Gospel of John, and start reading it. And as you read the Gospel of John, in your heart and mind, you ask God to reveal himself to you and you ask yourself the questions. I came to know Christ on a bed of suicide in Delhi when I was 17 years old. My ancestors came from the highest caste of the Hindu priesthood. We'd long abandoned that, but they came from the deep south in Kerala. They were called the Nambudhiris. I had no meaning in life as a young student, and I attempted to poison myself and end my life. A man walked in with a Bible. I don't know if I'd ever opened a Bible on my own. Maybe a little bit smattering here and there. I don't know. But I suddenly didn't own one. And he brings me this Bible, and he turns to the Gospel of John, chapter 14. Who's Jesus talking to? Thomas. What did Thomas say after the resurrection? He said, I'm not going to believe it until I see him. Once he did, he said, Ho kurios mu, ho theos mu, my Lord and my God. Thomas went to India to preach to whom? The Nambudhiris in the deep south of Kerala, and paid with his life. He went to a land of 330 million deities to give them the message of Christ. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me. The truth that Christ claimed, he justified, demonstrated. And when I prayed that prayer at the age of 17, that was 50 years ago, and I say to you, the transformation in my heart not only started immediately, it has grown and grown and grown, and the ultimate meaning that he alone can give to you by putting life back together. Grace and forgiveness and redemption are his. The conversion of the Apostle Paul from Saul to Paul, the confirmation to Thomas and James, the brother of Jesus. These three were going to ultimately change history because they had seen the resurrected Christ. We're a few days away from Easter. And the resurrection of Jesus said Konrad Adenauer to Billy Graham. He said, Mr. Graham, outside of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I know of no other hope for mankind. And so I say to you, take the truth claimed in the scriptures, put it to the test of truth and the coherence in the 4 questions. I will be praying for you as you've asked this question, and I pray one day you will find the logic of it, of whom God said, in the beginning was the Word, Logos. And the Word was God, Theos. And the Word became flesh, Sarkos. The logic of the incarnation and the logic of Jesus' answers will transform your life when you truly put your questions to him and see the coherence of the answers. I hope that helps a little bit. Michael, every religion.
Did you get the question?
So I think your question was, in every religion there's a golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if we did that, would there be peace? If my reading of the other world religions is correct, the statement in other religions globally is normally put in the negative. Do not do anything to anyone else that you don't want to have done to you. So it normally comes in the negative. Now what is unique in the Christian faith is Christ's positive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yes,
So, is this not working? Do we need to be...
I can hear you.
Here, Michael.
Sorry, so let me just repeat that again. Your question was, in case everyone didn't hear it, there's a golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's found in every world religion. If we did this, would there be peace?
Yeah.
The point I was making was, If you read other world religions, you'll actually find you don't find that phrase. The phrase you find is, do not do anything to anyone that you don't want to have done to yourself. It's always put as a negative. It's a prohibition. Don't do this to that person if you wouldn't want them to do it back to you. In other words, it's a policy of non-interference in other people's lives. What Christ advocated was something slightly different, which is what you quoted, because your quotation comes from the Bible. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In other words, not refrain from doing anything to anyone else if you wouldn't want it done back to you, but rather a positive act in this particular way. I'm sure that if a lot of people embraced it, that there would be, the world would look in a very different way. But then I'm bound to say that because as a Christian, I think if we embrace Christ, we will actually see a changing of the heart. I think the big problem comes, and I think the challenge for all of us comes in the fact that we struggle, if we're honest, to act in that way. It's not the fact we need so much to be reminded that we should do to others what we would have like done to ourselves. The simple truth is that we wrestle to live that way if we're honest. There was a huge survey done, a survey done by a while ago, and they asked people to imagine peace. And after they asked people to imagine peace in their mind, they asked them to describe it. Some people thought of mountains filled with snow, other people of beautiful lakes, other people of fields filled with flowers. Interestingly, one thing united all of these pictures together. There were no people in them. Now, isn't that interesting? We are asked to imagine peace, and the first thing we do is eliminate everyone else.
Oh la la, that's bad. Okay.
In that sense, it makes it easy then not to do anything that you wouldn't want them done to you. There's no one there to do anything to you because there's nobody there.
Nobody else.
Ask anyone with leadership responsibility who's a manager. If they could eliminate their people problems, they've eliminated almost all of their problems. So, I think the challenge isn't just so much how do we do this, how do we act this way, but what will change our heart so it is our desire to do unto others as they would have done unto us. And I think we are all looking for that which would change our heart, that we may actually live that way. And that's the life-changing transformation that Dr. Ravi Zacharias, I think, was talking about just moments earlier.
May I?
It's a great.
May I quote a famous man? I was tempted to quote Mahatma Gandhi. No violent people.
I was just going to say, it's a great question, but I think one thing you should always remember at the back of it, that all religions at their core are fundamentally different. They may be superficially similar. They're not fundamentally the same and superficially different. They are fundamentally different and superficially may have similarity. And once you get into that fundamental difference, it redefines what it means to be human and why the imperative must follow. And by the way, it is not always stated in the same way. I think it's important to know that there are some worldviews which would actually take issue with that. Some worldviews might say that we will have perfectly peace if I can eliminate you from the scene. You know, that's why Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is other people. He said, I'm okay until I bump into somebody else, if I could get rid of that person. And so there are some major religions in the world for whom elimination of a different person is the guarantor for peace. So the fundamental issues are far greater in all of these. A superficial statement of an imperative doesn't unite the fundamentally different worldviews. Just take humanism. If you take the humanistic ethic of Peter Singer from Princeton, you'd be aghast at what it is he thinks that we may have a right to do as humanists. So I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to take any more time. Any other question?
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask, can you logically show that a set of predetermined moral rules is going to be better in the long run than one simple minimal damage moral principle? For instance, I myself always get impressed by how much damage is done in the name of moral, in the name of honesty, as it brings so much prejudice to people around us. So I just wonder if you can
understand the question. I did follow it. Can somebody repeat the question here?
Could you go ahead and repeat the first question?
Well, I wonder if you can show, logically, as we speak about reasoning and logics here, that a set of predetermined moral principles, let's say like the Ten Commandments or some other example, actually will be superior in the long run than a simple minimal damage principle.
Did you get it?
I'll take it. I haven't followed. Can you repeat that?
Basically, how could something like the Ten Commandments, can you show with logic and reason why that would be superior to a principle of minimal damage? So just don't hurt anyone. Do what you want, just don't hurt anyone. Did I understand the question?
I didn't say that minimal damage means do what you want, just don't hurt anyone. I just say keep the damage minimal, and that can mean with any way you want.
Okay.
I think this is a fascinating question. Can we show that a set of moral principles is somehow superior than this a predetermined set of moral principles is somehow superior than just this basic principle of minimal damage, did you say?
Yes.
I think this goes a bit hand in hand with the prior question, the question about do unto others as you would have done unto you. There's a basic notion in morality of things that we should not do, plus things that we should do. If you notice the Ten Commandments, you'll see some of them are prohibitive and some are prescriptive. There's some things you should not do and some things you should do. And minimal damage does seem to be prohibitive. Don't do certain things, again, as was insinuated here, don't do certain things to hurt other people, or don't do certain things to hurt yourself, or however we might come from this minimal damage perspective, it seems to be addressing the prohibitive side. But as we saw in the question prior, there seems to be a notion that's universal in terms of things we should do. That, for example, love. We should love others. We should be selfless. We should care for one another. These kinds of principles I don't think can ever arise out of a minimal damage mindset. It needs to be one of, beyond minimal damage, it has to be one of self-sacrifice, one of altruism. And that generally can't be explained or defined from a naturalistic perspective, I would say. So what am I trying to get at? What reason would we have to be caring, loving, doing unto others as we would have done unto ourselves if there were no higher or greater good? And I think this is why, going back to the prior question, and I'll let you tack on after I finish, but going back to the prior question of do unto others as you've done unto yourself, I think there's a very specific reason why that works very well in Christianity. You look at the teaching found in Matthew chapter 6, which is related. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. When we have I think in a modern mindset, especially that post-Christian Western mindset, we can generally agree that we should do to our neighbors as we would have done to ourselves. Most people, whether religious or not, that I've seen in the West, agree with that tenet. Do unto others as you've done to yourself. But within the Christian context, it makes a lot of sense. Going back to Matthew chapter 6, what is Jesus telling us to do here? You look at the end of Matthew chapter 5, which goes into Matthew chapter 6, and Jesus says certain things. He says, go ahead and feed your enemy if your enemy is hungry. If your enemy is naked, clothe them. You also see in Jesus' teachings things like, if your enemy is thirsty, give them something to drink. All's fair and well, but how can we do that for our enemy? Well, for one, Christ, his example, his model in the Bible was that he was willing to die for sinners. According to Christian theology, Christ is God who's willing to die for his creation even though they had then pit himself against him after he created them. So Christ is willing to die for those who are rebelling against him. And so when somebody like that says to you, if your enemy is hungry, give them something to eat. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. It has a lot more meaning because he himself is doing it. He's giving life to those who don't have it. Going further than that, if God exists, if there is a creator, if there is a sustainer, if there is one who can sustain us, when he tells us, as he does in Matthew, that don't worry about your food, I will provide it for you. Don't worry about your clothes, I will provide it for you. You couple that with the teaching, now do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Let's take this rubber and make it meet the road here. I have a friend in Canada who she sees the neighbors, they're all Muslim refugees who are coming from overseas to Canada. And she sees them, they have need for a bed, they have need for clothes, they have need for a driver's license. And so she takes her time and she takes her money and she purchases beds, she purchases clothes, she helps them learn how to drive. She does for them as she would hope someone else would do for her. She loves them as she loves herself. Just as she would buy her own child a bed, she's spending her money to buy a bed for her neighbors. Now, that can only really happen to a great degree if you are comfortable that you will be sustained somehow. If you can pour yourself out self-sacrificially, you can only do that if you have confidence that you'll be sustained somehow. In the case of Christian theism, if you have a God who's willing to sustain you, then you can be self-sacrificial even unto your death. And that doesn't make much sense in any other notion. So coming back to this idea of a predetermined set of morals, I was raised not in a Christian environment. I was not raised Christian at all. I was raised up in a Muslim home. And when people, as I myself, as a Muslim, I would say to others, look, Islam, this predetermined set of morals is superior to Christianity. Christians would respond by saying, no, our predetermined set of morals are better. And it came into kind of like just an arguing match of who can talk louder. That wasn't too helpful because it's very difficult to somehow objectively quantify which set of morals will play out better. It's very difficult to do. And so I had to attach those notions to their epistemic core, to what it was that caused rise to those notions. And so for Christianity, then, I had to investigate evidence. I had to see what was it that gave me reason to listen to Jesus. It was a matter of identification. Why should I listen to your beliefs and your ideas as opposed to that person's beliefs and that person's ideas? And to keep a long story short, I believe that Jesus gave us good reason to believe in his teachings because he rose from the dead. For me, the resurrection is the reason why I believe in Jesus' teachings. And the reason why I believe in the resurrection is because I think it passes rigorous critical criteria of historical investigation. So that's why I can believe in these predetermined set of morals, because I believe in the person who gave them. And it makes most sense coming from that theistic framework, coherence. Sure, yes.
If what you say is true, that believing in God or a greater authority is necessary to love and to do selfless acts, then by this thinking, there cannot exist atheists that do charity. And I know quite a lot of atheists that do wonderful charity. They're helping the world, they're helping going to third world countries, trying to improve them in all possible ways, and that they love with the whole heart and have more empathy.
I agree with you entirely. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to clarify. I'm not saying that atheists cannot be moral. Atheists can be great people. So can people of any stripe and any background. Similarly, those who call themselves Christian could be horrible people. What I'm talking about is the logical outworking and consistency of a certain framework of ideas. So for example, once again, if I take the Christian mindset and I believe in a God who is sustaining me and is providing me with everything I have, and he tells me, that God tells me, go ahead and give to others as you would want to receive if you were them. If that God who's sustaining me, who could do anything, is telling me to do that, then I have confidence to pour myself out even unto death. Especially if I believe in an afterlife where God is going to take care of me for eternity, that gives me no reason to fear being willing to die for people. And the case I would draw your attention to is that of Ronnie Smith. I lived in Texas very recently for a year. And Texas is like a little country within the United States. It's supposedly a state, but it's like its own country. One of my fellow countrymen in that case was a man named Ronnie Smith. Ronnie Smith was a chemistry professor. He had spent his life learning how to teach, didactics, pedagogy, etc., and he had the gift of chemistry. And what he found out was that in Libya, there was a great need for chemistry teachers. And he thought to himself, I have this gift, they need that gift. If I were in their shoes, I should do as I would want done to me. I should love my Libyan neighbors as myself. I'm going to go teach them. People all around him were saying, Ronnie, do you realize that they're going to see you as an enemy? They might kill you. He said, I don't care, because my life is in Jesus' hands. My afterlife is in Jesus' hands. Even if they do kill me, I don't care. I'm going to go and teach them and to use my gift accordingly. Ronnie Smith went to Libya, and he taught for a short while. And then in December, I believe it was December 7th of this past year, so about 4 months ago, while he was out jogging, he was shot and killed. His wife wrote a letter a week later to those who killed him. And her words were as follows: I want the Libyans to know I still love them. I want the people who killed my husband to know I still love them, because God loves me unconditionally and he tells me to love others unconditionally. Therefore, I love you, and if I had the chance to do it all again, even if it meant the death of my husband, I would say yes and do it all again. That kind of confidence, that kind of love is only born out of a framework where you have a God who's going to take care of you and an afterlife which you can be confident in. On the flip side, if you have an atheist frame of mind, now I'm not saying atheists are all immoral. Once again, I want to qualify this. There's a lot of moral atheists. There are a lot of good, loving, altruistic atheists. But that said, I look at the atheistic framework, and I know this quite well because almost all my professors were atheists, both while I was studying religion and while I was studying medicine at medical school. And I know that the framework within which they teach is that the universe came into existence without any intentional cause. It was natural processes, random chance happened to cause the universe to come into existence. And after that happened, then you had galaxies that formed, and you had the Earth that happens to exist in a place where life can be sustained. On that Earth, somehow, and we're not exactly sure how because we have no functioning model of abiogenesis, but somehow life began. What does that mean for us then? What it means for life, what it means for human life is that every single person here, everyone who's listening to me right now, is for all intents and purposes a cosmic byproduct, is not actually valuable in any sense other than a utilitarian sense. And so, what would cause me to self-sacrificially take care of another cosmic byproduct? If all I have is this 80 years of life on this earth, why should I use it and deny myself my privileges versus help somebody else? Now, once again, we could still say that atheists love and care for one another, sure, but it doesn't come out of that frame of thinking. It doesn't come out of that notion of reality. So, in sum, I would say that the Christian notion of reality is one that if you're going to follow a God who's self-sacrificial and tells you to love others even to the point of your death, that breeds more altruism, that breeds more generosity than does a worldview which says you're a cosmic accident, so is everyone else. That's my perspective. Thanks for asking the question.
It's a great question, and I think, as Nabil said, followed on the heels of the other one. Let me add 2 footnotes to that are very important. The first one to underscore what Nabil has said and angle into it from a slightly different perspective, and then give you a closing thought, and we move to the next question. Moses gave 613 laws. David took those 613 and reduced it to 15. Isaiah reduced them to 11. Micah reduced it to 3, to do justice to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. I would have thought Jesus would reduce it to one. He didn't. When he was asked which is the greatest commandment, he said this: to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He said, on these two commandments hang all of the laws and the prophets. The one generated the next, because every individual is created in the image of God. So there was a logical sequence because of God's existence, the essential worth of every human being. But now let me underscore something very critically different. First of all, humanism is not monolithic. If you were to take the atheistic worldview, there are seven different humanistic value theories, ranging all the way from Marx's humanism to Ayn Rand's humanism. And so here's the point I want to make to you. In the Christian worldview, the problem is not morality. Jesus didn't come into this world to make bad people good. He came into this world to make dead people live. We are dead to God, and he came to make us alive to God. All of the religions of the world are ways of earning your way into heaven. All of them. Except in the Christian worldview, you cannot earn it. The problem is given to what morality itself cannot solve. I cannot earn my way to heaven. It is a gift of God's grace and God's forgiveness. So it stands unique and stands differently. So humanism by itself, different humanistic theories. All of the other religions are works-oriented religions. It's not so in the Christian faith. It is the grace of God and the forgiveness of God. So our goal is not ultimately to be more moral people. That is a result of what we have come to know as Christians, that I was dead to God and I'm alive to him. So the predicament is different, and therefore the solution is different as well. Leave that with you.
I have a question to Nabil Qureshi, and it's about me having a lot of friends that are Muslim and believing in the truth of the Muslim faith. And I want you to say which way do you think it's best to share the gospel with an honest believing Muslim?
Thank you. Thank you for your question, sir. I think it's very, very important to note exactly how you phrased the question, and that was, how do we share our faith with our Muslim friends? I'm sensing in the West a growing trend of fear, of xenophobia, if you will, of Muslims, that we should be afraid of them, that we should protect ourselves against them. I think first and foremost of my mother. When someone says the word Muslim, I think of my mother first, because every Ramadan she recites the Quran twice. She reads 2 Separa of the Quran every single day. She taught me to pray 5 times a day, not including nafil prayers and sunnah prayers. She taught me to recite the Quran from the age of 4 to by the age of 5. I had recited the entire Quran in Arabic. So when I think Muslim, I see her as kind of my archetypal Muslim, of course, Muhammad aside. And she is one of the most loving, kind, generous, hospitable people you'll ever meet. And so for someone to ask me the question, well, what should we do with the Muslims? That to me immediately says, whoa, you have the wrong attitude. Your attitude was a right one. How should we love them? How should we share with them? So I would say the answer is the same as the preamble. The first thing we have to do is befriend. We have to get to know people. A true friendship, not a superficial one, not one with the aim of converting, but a true friendship. I think as a Christian, we are called to love as God loves us. Actually, that's actually what the Bible says. Don't just love those who love you. Even pagans do that. Love those who do not love you. And so we have to make sure our love is unconditional and it extends to all people. And especially as Muslims, the numbers of Muslims coming from the Middle East and immigrating to other parts of the world is increasing. I was asked a question very recently about that by a newspaper in the US, and they said, how should we respond to all these mosques being built? And should we try to stop the mosques from being built, or how should we? It's like, I said, no, that's where we should go and meet Muslims and befriend them so that we can build dialogue. Because the fact of the matter is, when I was a Muslim, I didn't understand Christians. None of them were talking to me. None of them were really sharing life with me. Every now and then when someone would talk, they would just try to share the gospel with me, but I thought, what do you care about me? What do you care about my way of life? All you want to do is convert me, so why should I listen to you? And the first time someone actually befriended me, a Christian actually befriended me, we started understanding one another. Well, he actually had Muslim friends before. He was my first real Christian friend. And to me, I thought, for example, that the idea of the Trinity was absolute blasphemy. The Quran says in chapter 5, verse 73, stop saying three. Stop saying Trinity. Desist. It would be better for you. Chapter 5, verse 72, the verse before said, if you believe that Jesus is Allah, then you are going to hell. Your place is the abode of fire. And so, to me, the idea of Trinity was absolute blasphemy. And whenever I'd speak to a Christian and ask them, can you explain the Trinity to me? They were simply unable. They weren't able to tease out the difference between three beings and one being and three persons. And they weren't able to tease that out. And so, with my friend who shared the gospel with me, what he did first and foremost was befriend me. I would say 90% of the time we spent together was studying genetics or biology. I was pre-medicine, he was a biology major, and so we just enjoyed life together. And then the last 10% was doors were opened up to share the gospel on his behalf, and for me it was a door to da'wah. I was trying to convert him to Islam. And so I wasn't successful. I don't know if you noticed. So how do we share the gospel? And I cannot overemphasize the importance of befriending and getting to know them, because some Muslims don't have any problems with Christian theology. They have problems with the Israel-Palestine conflict, or they have problems with the way the Crusades happened. That's kind of their issue. Other Muslims, like I had an issue with the theology. How could Jesus be God? That's blasphemy. Jesus didn't die on the cross. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ from Surah An-Nisa. It says very clearly, Jesus did not die on the cross, nor was he crucified. So befriend them. See what it is that their issues are. My firm belief as a Christian is that everyone needs the gospel in some sense or another. And so befriend them and find out in what way can the gospel address their life. I was at Louisville, Kentucky a few weeks ago, and I had a student who came up to me and asked me this very question. He didn't have a father in his life. And so getting to know him and his story was kind of my goal. And then when I realized he didn't have a father in his life, for me it was all of a sudden, okay, this is the thing I'm going to focus on, what it means for God to be your father and what it means to have a good father. So there's no magic bullet here. There's no one thing to do to share with people, except I think that common core of befriending and then understanding and speaking into their heart and their concerns. And always be ready to give a defense for the faith that you have, being ready to provide reasons for those who ask you. So if you have Muslim friends, I guarantee you at some point or another, if they see you living a devout Christian life, they're going to start asking you, how could you believe this stuff? Or why do you believe in the Bible? Don't you understand it's been changed over time? Or how could you believe in Jesus as God? Don't you see he worshiped God? They're going to have these questions, as 1 Peter 3:15 intimates. So be ready to provide those answers and be humble enough to say, if you don't know the answer, say, look, I don't know, but I will find out, because if it's important to you, it's important to me. So I'll find out and we'll discuss this. So come at it with an attitude of love and humility, and I think the rest will unfold as your relationship progresses.
A question from text. How can you show that there are moral absolutes? Isn't all that we can muster subjective ideas about morality?
That's a very, very good question. There have been various attempts to try, and this is now where we come back to this very important question about who says something. I have two younger brothers. One of them lives here in Stockholm, is married to a Swedish girl and has fallen in love with Swedish paternity provision since he had 3 children under the age of 2 and thinks this is the best country in the world. My other brother, some people feel, is working for an evil enterprise called Goldman Sachs. And but when he was much younger, he was working as an accountant, and he went to audit the books of a very large firm. And as he finished, he said to the CEO of the company, "Can I do anything else for you?" And the CEO said, "I'm not falling for that trick again." And my brother said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Last year, an accountant from your company," it was called Arthur Anderson at the time, came and did our audit. And at the end, he sat where you're sitting and said to me, "Is there anything else we can do?" I asked a simple personal taxation question and was sent a bill for £5,000. He said, "I'm not falling for that trick." And my brother said, "Look, if it's really that simple, I'm sure it won't be a problem." He asked a very simple question. My brother rang up his office. He said, "What's the answer to this question?" They gave it to him, and then they said, "And what is the job number?" My brother went quiet because every client has a number, and when someone asks for the number, it's to bill it. So he said, "Why do you want the job number?" He says, "Every call gets logged in the computer, every inquiry is categorized, and every inquiry gets charged." My brother said, "Well, what will be the charge?" And the guy said, "Minimum charge, £5,000. And my brother went very quiet. And then he said over the phone, "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who you're talking to?" And now the voice on the other end went quiet. And he went, "No, sir, I have no idea." And my brother said, "Well, neither do I," and he hung up the phone. Now, the question comes about authority. So the simplest logical place to start with any moral command would be this: when anyone is offering it to you, who says so? That has to be one of your first questions. And the human mind, no matter how brilliant we think we are, is capable of sometimes making very profound mistakes. Someone once described logic as going wrong with confidence, and although that isn't necessarily the case, it's certainly, we have the capacity for it. So the question comes down to, on whose authority? And this is why within the Christian faith, all of these questions eventually get pushed back into one foundational question. Who is the person of Jesus Christ? If he is God incarnate, what he has to say about morality is going to be right even if we think he's wrong. I mean, would you want to mark God's maths test? I mean, if you did a maths test and God did a maths test and you disagreed about the final answer, who's more likely to have got it right? So, if Christ is the person of God, his pronouncement and insight on this area is going to far outweigh anything that any of us could say. I think this is why in the book of Proverbs it says, "There is a way that seems right to a person, but its path leads to death." There are times when we persuade ourselves completely that it is the moral right thing to do and it's what we should do, but it's actually the wrong path, and we discover too late. If Jesus is who he claims to be, then we have an authoritative voice on this question. If Jesus Christ is not who he claims to be, if he is not God incarnate, if he's just another human voice, then by all means let us see what insight he may have had, critique him with the benefit of hindsight, and sift through what we think is good and reject that which we think he got wrong. But if he is who he claims to be, then we can trust what he has to say with a huge amount more certainty. Now, once you've moved outside of that, I think it may be possible, through some rational means, to try to persuade people on the basis of what we call contingency, that there may be such a thing as human rights, and maybe we can formulate some idea of what those could look like. But it's very difficult. And I can remember speaking at the London School for Economics a couple of years ago, and having a delegation come to me because they were hosting the Student United Nations debates, and a group of students from China and another group from India came and said, we completely reject the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is the foundation for all Western human rights. And we have spent the whole time here this week being told how we should treat people, labor laws and human rights laws, and we believe none of it. Can you persuade us, if we do not believe there's anything special about being human, that we are not created in God's image, that there is no sacredness to life, why we should listen to anyone lecture us on human rights? And I looked to another group of Western students who were there, and I said, what do you make of this? And they said, well, we've been losing every debate for the last week. And I remember looking back at this other group of students, and I said, no, I think you're correct in your analysis. This is why the professor of the history of European thought at the London School for Economics, who has written many, many books, wrote a book entitled Straw Dogs, in which, as the professor of European thought at the London School for Economics said, it is time for us atheists to finally reject humanism. Humanism is Christianity dressed up in liberal, secular terms. Humanists repeat the same error that Christians make. Christians believe there is something special about being human, and as a result of that, argue for human rights. But we have rejected God. We are not created in God's image. There is no God in whose image we can be created. And now we need to reject all forms of human rights, because in the end it's all about power. The strong will always dominate the weak, and the West is being held back by an ethic where it is not using its military force to dominate the nations around it. And if we don't dominate them, they will come and dominate us. Let us finally develop a political and economic theory that's consistent with our atheistic Darwinian conviction, where only the fittest survive, because if we don't get them, they'll come after us. And this is now from a professor who has written books that have sold tens of millions of copies. So please don't think this professor is some strange guy sitting in the middle of nowhere. He occupied one of the most prestigious university chairs in the world in political thought. And this is the conclusion he's come to. Now, he and I agree about everything apart from one thing. Because he and I are agreed that if there is a God and Christ is him, and we were created in his image, then this argument goes exactly the opposite way. So I think it's a very good question. I think it's a very strong question. I would urge you to start, if you're interested in looking at it from a Christian perspective, from there. The most eloquent book I've read on this issue from an atheistic perspective, and I agree with everything he says, apart from the belief that there is no God, would be Professor John Gray from the London School for Economics in his book Straw Dogs. And if you haven't read it, I'll read that book. I think it's a fascinating book written by a guy who's trying to be intellectually honest with the moral outworkings of his own atheistic conviction. And I think he puts his case very, very eloquently and very, very powerfully and very, very brilliantly.
I think we'll bring this to a close with a closing statement here. Now, I think I saw one person standing there. Do you want to accommodate that question? Otherwise, we may get stoned. Are you planning to raise a question from the microphone for Nabil or Michael?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Actually for you, because you were talking about segregation. As I understood, segregation is for me when you have the separation of old and young, rich and poor, foreigners and natives. So as we were talking about logic, how would your suggestion be for a logical solution to work against segregation?
To work against what?
Segregation.
Segregation.
You were pointing out worldviews, so maybe working against segregation of worldviews.
I think I followed it until you added that statement. How would I argue logically against segregation?
Or my question was, how can we work against segregation in a logical way?
Fair enough. Let me make sure again, if I don't answer it, make sure you let me know. When you talk about segregation, are you talking about racial, cultural, and all of those things? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, this
Okay.
is how I understand it from the media.
Have I got it right? Okay. You see this gray hair? It goes down to here. And there's less gray transmitting. I actually have an amplification system that in open forums helps me to hear it, but I didn't bring it today. So it allows me to ignore questions more easily. All right. It's a great question, and I think it's a question of great importance. I was born in India, raised in India. Even though I was raised in the north, I was born in the south. In terms of complexion, the southerner has a different complexion to the northerner. In terms of language, they have a different language, north and south. Even in the north, there are many different languages. In terms of the way they eat, the manner in which they hold the food in their hands, you can watch a northerner and a southerner and know which part they come from. There are real differences. The tragedy of racism and looking at superiority and inferiority in one way or the other is a very painful thing in life. And there are tensions within countries as there are tensions interracially as well. It's not just internationally. The whole caste system is a pretty fascinating. That's why, by the way, one of the reasons Gautama Buddha left Hinduism and started his own Buddhist way of thinking was because of the caste system. It was a segregated way right from the beginning. Now, most of my Indian friends with whom I live, you never hear it brought up, you never mention it. My friends, we had no issue with it, but theoretically, it was actually there. What I think it is critical for us to address this whole issue of segregation, the Christian worldview is a unique answer here, and I'll tell you why. When you look at the way differences are there, Friedrich Nietzsche made the comment, equality. Do you have my book there, Matt? I think I want to quote this for you because I think it is fascinating what Nietzsche as an atheist said here. Let me see if I can find that. I don't know if I will. It's somewhere here that he made the comment. Here it is. I want you to listen to this carefully because Hitler's extension of Nietzschean thought is precisely what you've really raised right here. Says Nietzsche, the atheist, equality is a lie. Equality is a lie concocted by inferior people who arrange themselves in herds to overpower those who are naturally superior to them. The morality of equal rights is a herd morality because it opposes the cultivation of superior individuals. It leads to the corruption of the human species. Equality is a lie concocted by inferior people. This was Nietzschean thought, something that Hitler had in his own mind, the Übermensch, the Superman. If you go into certain worldviews who will talk to you about reincarnation, why will they boast about it? Every birth is a rebirth for which you're paying for the previous birth. This is the way it actually goes. Jesus had a man come to him, and the man said to him, "Is it all right to pay taxes to Caesar?" Now, I have to tell you this, the day before I began this trip, I had to pay my taxes to Caesar because April 15th will come before I get home, and I resented having to go and pay what Caesar asked me to pay. So I wish Jesus had said no. It would have been a wonderful freedom from Caesar, okay? But Jesus looked at the man and said to him, "Do you have a coin?" And the man said, "Yes." He said, "Give it to me." Jesus took the coin and Jesus said to him, "Whose image do you see on this?" He said, "Caesar's." He said, "Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's and give to God that which is God's." The man should have had another question. What belongs to God? Jesus would have said, "Whose image is on you?" You belong to God. When Jacob and Esau met after years of being hostile towards each other, one said to the other, I see in your face the face of God. Jesus pays you the greatest compliment, and me the greatest compliment, in saying we are created in the image of God. I'm grateful to God for my ethnicity. I'm glad I was born where I was born. My Indian heritage is very precious to me, and never wanted to be anybody else. Others may wish I was somebody else, but I'm glad I am who I am. When I look at a fellow human being, I see him or her as created imago Dei, image of God. So I will never violate their intrinsic worth. The Christian worldview is against the segregated process because it creates a hierarchy of that which God has called equality. You have human rights because humanity has essential worth. That essential worth is given to you by God. And so when you go to the Ten Commandments, what does it say? Life is sacred, your marriage is sacred, your property is sacred, your time is sacred, your possessions are sacred, and so are mine. I do not have the right to violate it. So with that imperative, racism or cultural superiority or all of that is anathema in the mind, in the eyes of God. And that's why I said to somebody today at lunch, Mahatma Gandhi said about Christianity, I like their Christ, I don't like their Christian. Because Christendom in history has not always lived with the convictions of what our Savior gave to us. I'll close with this illustration, two of them actually. A woman at the well that Jesus spoke to, a woman with 5 broken marriages. And the disciples are saying to him, what on earth are you doing talking to this Samaritan woman? She was a Samaritan, she was a woman, 5 shattered marriages. Jesus sits by the well and waits for her to come, talks to her, and made her the first evangelist to the Samaritan people. A woman with the alabaster ointment, who probably got it through her trade and through her private life, comes into the room and washes his feet with the alabaster ointment and with her tears. And the Pharisees who lived by the law make the comment, if he only knew who she was, he would never have allowed her to do this to him. And he looked at him, the Pharisee, who never spoke a word, and he says this, if a man were forgiven 500 and a man were forgiven 50, who do you think would love the creditor more? He says, well, the one who owed more. He said, you're looking at her. You're looking at her. I walked into the museum today to see the Silver Bible going back to 400, 500 AD. I was in Albania, where they have one written in the 400s by Chrysostom in gold ink. And when they brought it for me to see, with guards holding it, it opened to the passage of the woman with the alabaster ointment. And in Greek, what Jesus says is this, wherever the gospel is preached, there shall also this be told of what this woman has done to me. He elevated the despised in a community and gave them the equality of his gospel story of what he did to this individual life. God alone knows how to exalt you without flattering you and to humble you without humiliating you. And he does that for all of us as human beings. We are created in the image of God. So I just close with this. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the courtesy of listening to us. Thank you for the grace with which you have given us a hearing. We know many of you may not agree with everything we've said, but you have to please give this one thought. Where we go personally and in civilization, Will Durant said, the greatest question of our time is not going to be east or west, north or south, communism versus capitalism. The greatest question of our time is going to be, can man live without God? I wrote a book based on that statement, So ask yourself the question, is it not important to find out who God is, if he exists, and what is it he has said to us in sending his Son to be the Savior of the world? Turn to the Gospel of John, ask him to speak to you, and tomorrow night we will give you a talk on why we follow Christ, the defense of the Christian faith. Good night, and God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Zacharias. Thank you, Michael and Nabil. Thank you all for coming. Tomorrow evening, Dr. Zacharias will talk about why I am a Christian. Tonight, under your seat, there is a response card. We would love for you to fill it out. It will only take a second. There are only a couple of questions on there. We'd love to know what you think. Also, as you leave, you can put that in some boxes that are on your way out through the center aisle here. Thank you so much. Tomorrow evening will also be live streamed as well. For those of you who are watching at home, please check it out on YouTube. We'll see you tomorrow.
If we can help you fill it out, we'll be happy to do it.